Yeah. Okay, guys, we're going to get started so if everybody can take a seat. If everybody can take a seat. Okay, so my name is Jocelyn. I'm the current president of the Undergraduate Political Science Association. I want to thank you, all of you, for coming today. I know it's midterm season and everyone's busy, but in light of the recent events that have happened, we decided to host a forum. We brought along some amazing panelists. These are very knowledgeable people on SB 185, on affirmative action, and any of the surrounding issues or legislation. So we hope that you guys learn a lot from what they have to say today. Just a couple of reminders before I allow them to give a brief introduction about themselves. The purpose of this event is educational, so please don't disrupt any of the panelists as they speak, so that we can all learn, and because we have a very short amount of time for how much knowledge these people have to offer us. And secondly, make sure all your electronics are turned off. So everybody's reaching in. Today, our moderator will be Susie Tumanian. She's our external vice president, and she will be an excellent moderator because she's very strict on time, and she's going to be very neutral today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Susie and the rest of our panelists. Again, thank you all for coming.
Hi everyone, my name is Susie Tumanian. As Jocelyn said, I'm the current external vice president of UPSA. My role is to be as neutral and unbiased as possible. I'm going to try to yield as much time as I can to each panelist or each side to make it as ethical as possible. We really want to have a good dialogue here. We want to respect everyone's opinions, and I think at the end of the day, we're probably going to have to agree to disagree. So the point is not to decide who is right or wrong, it's really to learn from each other and to have a meaningful dialogue about this issue that has been very relevant on campus and in California lately. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce all the panelists and give them 1 to 2 minutes to briefly state their name, what their position is, basically on affirmative action. And like I said, try to keep it to 1 to 2 minutes, and if your opinions have already been stated by others who agree with you, please feel free to move on and yield the time back for further questions. So we'll just start right here on my left with Sean Lewis.
I'm Sean Lewis. I'm president of the Berkeley College Republicans, and I want to thank everybody for coming out to this, all you guys and panelists here. Unfortunately, I don't see the Cal Dems tonight, but we're glad for everybody who did come out. So I want to say just briefly, real quick, there's still some debate as to what the effect of the bake sale was and maybe what feelings it led to on campus. But right now, you're looking at the effect of the bake sale. We are brought together in debate. We're brought together to talk about the issue specifically. And we brought people off camp from the people outside the campus community to discuss this issue in substance. So this is the effect of the bake sale, and I'm glad that we're here today. Some of my points I'm going to make tonight, I'm going to try to go in detail, is first the illegality or the unconstitutionalness of SB 185 is blatantly illegal. Governor Brown should veto it, and it directly violates our state constitution. We'll go into that. We'll talk about Michigan. We'll talk about all kinds of stuff. Also, affirmative action, just in general, as a policy, as a philosophy, doesn't work. You can look at statistics. You can look at data pre-Prop 209. And you can look at after Prop 209 in terms of graduation rates, in terms of success of college admits. Affirmative action doesn't work in any of its missions, and we'll talk about that hopefully specifically. Actually, I don't have much time, so I'll go into those hopefully later tonight.
Thank you, Sean. And next we move on to Andre.
Hi everyone, my name is Andre Lewis, and I'm the internal vice president of Students for Liberty. My position on affirmative action. SB 185 is a bill that tries to, in its very best, to codify the same discrimination that it claims to oppose. Affirmative action is a policy that misses the point on every level. It doesn't work, as Sean just said. It doesn't function. And what we should be concerned about in college admissions is the qualifications of the candidates, and there are much better ways to help the various minority groups in this country to get to a better position. So I'll be talking about that.
Thank you, Andre. Next we'll move on to Glenn Custard.
My name is Glenn Custard, Professor Emeritus, California State University, East Bay, and I'm the co-author of Proposition 209. The nation was founded on the principle of individual rights. And obviously this was withheld for a good sector of our population for 200 years. In 1964, we finally brought our legal system into line with those values in the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which affirmed the individual rights principle. Affirmative action was set up by bureaucrats who were trying seriously to move this thing forward. They said, let's take affirmative action steps to see that people who have been denied their rights get their rights now. What happened, unfortunately, is that, like so many other things, it rigidified. It turned into a system not based on individual rights, but group privileges. And you'll hear from some of the other panelists tonight some of the outcome of that. Prop 209 was nothing more than an attempt to reassert the principles of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. We took it almost word for word, just a little bit of difference. It won in the court of public opinion, and it also won in the legal courts. It was pronounced constitutional by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. Now we're looking at an attempt by some people in the legislature, SB 185, to overturn it. It's illegal, and it's not going to work. The state of California needs to expend its money not on vain lawsuits, but on something like education, something like students, something like our future, instead of trying to fight this old battle from the past and lose.
Thank you very much. Next, we'll move on to Ronald Cruz.
Hi, I'm an organizer with BAM, which stands for the Coalition to Defend Affirmative Action, Integration, and Immigrant Rights, and Fight for Equality by Any Means Necessary. Graduate from Berkeley Law School in 2009, and I'm one of the attorneys on the team that's challenging Proposition 209 in court. We succeeded on July 1st in getting Michigan's version of Prop 209, Proposal 2, overturned by the 6th Circuit Court of Appeals. And we're campaigning statewide to get affirmative action restored in the University of California. Affirmative action, that term applies to all the sets of programs often voluntarily adopted by universities and employers mid-1960s forward to make Brown versus Board of Education real throughout the nation, as beyond simply banning illegal segregation. The civil rights movement spread to the north to tackle de facto segregation in higher education and employment. Between 1960 and 1968, the University of Michigan Law School graduated 4 black students out of its law school out of 3,000, fewer than the University of Mississippi Law School. And it was needed to have affirmative action policies to desegregate the North. And the logical cornerstone of affirmative action is that you need an active remedy to discrimination. Otherwise, the burden of combating discrimination falls on victimized individual racial minorities and women. You need a social remedy. And so that's why we defend affirmative action.
Thank you very much, Ronald. Next, we'll move on to Salih.
My name is Salih Muhammad. I'm a member of the coalition. First, I'd like to thank you all for putting on this forum. It is a much-needed discussion. So I would like to give my applause. I want to be brief, and I'll just make it really a very, very quick couple of points. Point number one is I understand that the debate so was intended to produce more discussion about affirmative action, which we do agree that that is a positive thing, that more discussion is occurring. However, we disagree in the manner that discussion was produced. Whether that matter was offensive, that matter was hurtful, that matter was disrespectful, and the manner in which it was produced added on to the many microaggressions that people of color and women endure on this campus each and every single day. That's point number one. Point number two is that affirmative action must be viewed in a long-standing historical progression. It did not just pop up. Affirmative action was the result of hundreds of years since before the founding of America, where people of color have been treated unjustly and have been dehumanized. And as a result, to make up for the institutional and structural discrimination that has occurred for such a long and prolonged period of time, a policy was implemented to combat that discrimination and to combat the institutional ways in which people of color have been disallowed from access to equal education. And so that's the purpose of affirmative action. It is to take a necessary action to bring America back to a more equal setting, not back because it's never been there, but to bring America to a more equal setting where people can be on the same footing. And so the last point I want to make is that not only does affirmative action do that, but when you think about it, you have to think about it in the terms of the context in which it is found. The context is that the state of California educational system is an epic failure, particularly for people of color who are undereducated, who are miseducated, and go to schools most often that are lacking educational resources. And so they go kindergarten, first grade, second grade, all the way up to 12th grade, miseducated or poorly educated, and then they get to college, to the college level application, they finally get a break. So affirmative action is trying to reverse what has been done through structural and institutional processes that place people of color and women and many others at a disadvantage.
Thank you very much, Sally. Next, we'll go to Marco.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marco Amaral. I'm also a member of the coalition. Like Lee said, thank you all for coming out tonight. Thank you to the Undergraduate Political Science Association for putting this together. So mine will be brief. And I'd like to have this conversation today based on not just SB 185, affirmative action, but also our campus climate and what we're going through as people of color, as women, as Lee has mentioned, what different minorities are going through every single day on this campus, right? But I wanted to quote President Johnson when he said why affirmative action was needed. And he said, "You do not wipe away the scars of centuries by saying, quote, now you are free to go where you want, do as you desire, and choose the leaders you please. You do not take a man who for years has been hobbled by chains, liberate him, bring him to the starting line of a race, saying, you are free to compete with all others, and still justly believe you have been completely fair. This is the next and more profound stage of the battle for civil rights." He was referring to affirmative action. "We seek not just freedom, but opportunity. Not just legal equity, but human ability. Not just equality as a right and in theory, but equality as a fact and as a result. We have not today achieved that result. And it shows every single day you walk through this campus that this campus is not diverse. That's a fallacy of this campus, that this campus does not represent the demographics of the state of California or the country. We have not reached that milestone in our history, that result that many of our leaders in the past were fighting for, that today we continue to fight for. And I feel that SB 185 is a step in the right direction.
Thank you, Marco. Next, we'll move on to Ruben.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ruben. I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank for the invitation to be here. I really appreciate this conversation. I would have preferred it to be a dialogue as opposed to a panel, just because I feel more comfortable in conversation. It feels a little bit awkward to be here because I don't see myself as an expert in any field whatsoever. But just want to offer you my perspectives. So I come I'm part of the Meniere Scholars program. So my research 2 summers ago was trying to understand the California policies that allow for different UCs to have different representation on their campuses. And the populations that I focus on is first-generation students, low-income students, and students of color, at all 3 levels. Because those have been the predominantly historically underrepresented folks on these different university campuses. So I go from that research perspective, and also I'm one of the counselors with the Education Opportunity Program. We service first-generation and low-income students. So I kind of want to have the conversation regarding something that often gets silenced, which is the support services that allows for these students that once they matriculate to higher education, the support systems that they need in order for them to get the proper mentorship and proper support, both academic and psychological. And just the 4 points that I wanted to introduce my perspectives from are the following. I think we're doing a great job tonight in creating critical spaces of dialogue where multiple political perspectives come into dialogue with one another, so that we can better educate one another from the perspectives that we're coming from. So I really appreciate tonight. But also to have the conversation of what's the purpose of public education in our state, what's the purpose of higher education, and what's the purpose of higher education, and who's going into those and who's not going into those historically, and who do we want to be there in the future. Second, I think we must be very critical of problematic statements that say that our higher education, and our higher education systems need to be representative of the population of the state. Just because me being a Latino, I'm very conscious that the upcoming majority are Latinos. And I don't believe that our system needs to be overpopulated by Latinos, but in fact be more critical to make sure that there's more than just that representation that equals that of the state. but engage with one another and make sure that the minds and the bodies are creating a collective space where different experiences and political arenas come into play and educate one another. So I think that's my second point. And the third point is, I think throughout the history in terms of policies for undergraduate admissions, we have a very reactionary policy development where the decision-making happens like reactionary, right? We have a crisis, let's make a decision on the spot without making educated policy development. So going beyond that, and the last one, more so of a question that I want to present to all of us here, and it's something, a question that I'm myself dealing with, is since Proposition 209 passed, there's been roughly about 15 years or so, if my math is not incorrect. Hopefully it's not that bad. I'm not a math major, just bear with me. But are we heading in the right direction with the current policies, or lack thereof the policies that we have currently in state? Is that the right direction for us, or can we develop policies and better systems to improve our state, our country, and to be better participants in this world system that we now live in, where we have like a global village engaging with one another? So I think that's what I'm here for, to learn from one another, from the panelists, hopefully from the folks here. Give me some of your knowledge so I can better have a holistic approach to these questions that I have for myself and for my research. And also want to excuse myself, I do have to leave a little bit early because I have a meeting with a mentor group that will work with foster care children. They're trying to get to college, so I do have to step out a little bit early, so I apologize for that. But thank you for the invitation tonight.
Thank you, Ruben. Once again, I just want to encourage you guys to respond to each other, pose questions to each other, as long as it's done in a respectful and slightly academic way. I'm only here to guide, move along, and ensure the fairness and objectivity of this panel. So please, if you guys have questions for each other, let me know.
Just point of order.
Yes.
What's the policy on like audience response or like response to each other? Snapping, is that acceptable? Because I know this is snapping. I'd like to use snapping.
I think just to ensure.
No sounds from the
I
audience.
think that just to keep this orderly and calm, we should just avoid all snaps, claps, whistles, and other noise-making attempts. Yes. Okay. I know this sounds bad as well. I know snapping's not too bad, but if you guys wouldn't mind, just keep it to words. And the audience, we are asking you guys don't ask questions and don't respond to the panel. At the end, there will be time for question and answer. That's what the note cards are for. And if you need some at the end, we'll be going around with those as well. And just before we move on, can everyone hear everyone, or do we need to use the microphones?
Sounds fine.
We're good?
Project. Someone said microphone. You didn't hear.
Someone said microphone?
I heard someone say. I said project.
All right, we'll just ask the panelists to project and we'll move on. The last point that was made was about Prop 209, and since we have two experts on Prop 209 here, I feel like that would be a good place to start off with. So if I could just ask Glenn and Ronald, Glenn, can you please outline the provisions of Prop 209 and why was it passed in 1996? And also, do you consider that bill to be a success over the last 15 years, just to help educate the audience on what Prop 209 is?
Well, Proposition 209 is a sentence for put into California law exactly the provisions of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which focused on individual rights rather than group preferences. So what Prop 209 tried to do is to refocus it on that and to get rid of the idea that just because you are black or just because you're Latino or whatever, that you got special privileges. Now, the question is, has it worked? Well, what it did do was it stopped the progress of a movement that we thought was really getting out of hand. And so, in one sense, it has worked. But obviously, we have people who are doing everything they can to demolish it. So it's a continuing struggle.
Okay, thank you. And also to Ronald, can you please give us an overview of the work that you've been doing on Prop 209 and the reasons behind it?
Yeah, we are working by any means necessary, including through lawsuits and building a mass integrated civil rights movement to overturn 209 because it's been a massive failure in California. This year at UC Berkeley, among freshman class, there are 3,960 California resident freshmen, of whom only 139 are black. Now, no one can tell me that there are only 139 black students who can handle the, UC Berkeley and deserve to be here. That's an indication where some people would say that's a product of meritocracy. I think that rides on racist assumption that the criteria are neutral and that if you don't do well on a particular criterion, such as the SAT or so forth, then it's your fault. We all know, no one can deny, that you can get test preparation for the SAT. There's fairtest.org has studies on the racial bias that's independent of socioeconomic bias against underrepresented minority students practiced by the SAT. Fairtest.org also shows how the SAT does not correlate with your success in college. All it does is predict 15% of the variation of your first year freshman grades, nothing beyond, just to predict your graduation rates and so forth. And so why do we use it as policy for admission? One last thing is that I've heard some words on this side of the panel saying we need to fix K-12 education, but Brown for Supportive Education said that separate education is inherently unequal. And the same proponents of any affirmative action, same legal organization, Pacific Legal Foundation that we're dealing with in court, has also used Prop 209 as a hammer to prohibit communities like Los Angeles and Berkeley Unified from voluntarily desegregating kindergartens through 12th grade to make sure that those schools are racially diverse. Now, if that's race blindness, I would say, well, we don't need, race blindness has been disastrous for California.
And can I ask one of the student groups, would you like to respond to 209? Either you or Andre?
Oh, sure. Student group K. So the last, well, a couple things, but the last thing that was really just said was that Prop 209 has just obviously been an utter failure. And one point I want to make is that when you look at actual numbers and comparative data before 209 and where we are today, it is very obvious that actually Prop 209 has been successful for underrepresented groups. When you look at 209 ended affirmative action at Berkeley and UCLA, minority group enrollment dropped perhaps, but when you compare the numbers of those, enrollment numbers that dropped compared to today, but then when you look at after pre-Prop 209, when you look under affirmative action, after the first semester of enrolled classes at these higher institutions, the dropout rates brought them down to an enrollment number that was actually very comparable to where we're at now. But more importantly, what I have actual numbers on is if you look at the class 95 to 96, the 95 graduation rate for African Americans specifically in the UC system under affirmative action was 26%. African Americans in the UC system graduated at a rate of 26%. Now, more recently, 2001, well after affirmative action was over, Prop 209, we have a graduation rate of 52% of African Americans in the UC system. And there's a misconception that Prop 209 has led to an overall decline in minority enrollment in the California system, but that's actually entirely false. But if you look at the numbers, there's actually been a reapportionment of minorities to other schools, whereas there are less at Berkeley or UCLA, but actually the numbers at Riverside, Santa Cruz, for example, have dramatically increased since 2009. Riverside's, for example, UC Riverside has increased by 240% since Prop 209, so it's a blatant mischaracterization that 209 has failed in that way.
Okay, thank you, Sean. And either Ruben, Sully, or Marco, which one of you would like to respond as well?
I think I just have maybe some questions in terms of that.
Mm-hmm.
So, with the respect to statistics that were just thrown out there, I think the question for us, for me individually, sorry, not for anybody else, but for me is, why is it that with Proposition 209 in statute, right, that has been historically been since 1996, in most recent years, Proposition 209 hasn't had the same effect on international students as it has had on historically students of color? Because my question is, how is it that within the past 3 years, specifically at UC Berkeley, like you pointed out, at UC Berkeley has been an increase between international students of over 300% in the last 3 years, right? So my question is, how is it that in Proposition 209, such a drastic difference of effect it's having for specific populations, and how can we develop a better policy so that something like that does not happen? Now, that's just for the pure representation. How is it that since 1996 to today, we haven't been able to increase the representations of historically students of color in that matter, and to disaggregate the data so that we know who are these Asian students that are overpopulating the UC according to a lot of the formats, right? And in terms of Caucasian, to when are we going to start recording Arab students and disaggregate the white also aggregated data so that we know what's going on so that we can have a better track. And I think one of the requirements for SB 185, if I'm not mistaken, is saying one of the clauses says that we need to disaggregate the data to have better numbers. And the issue with that is that with the budget crisis and all this stuff, If you look at the UC Stat Finder, which gives us that statistics, it's been terminated. Last year was the last year that they're going to be reporting public system-wide statistics that the public can actually utilize for research. And now you have to actually call in and ask for that data and actually pay a certain amount of money from the university to have access to that. And then at the state level, the state office that deals with higher education policy, so on and so forth, in 2003 got cut by almost half of the staff. So what is going on in the priority as a state with higher education and our services and our policies? Is that a priority or is that not a priority? And how can we make it a priority if we agree that higher education should be one of the priorities of the state?
Would you like to respond to that before we move on?
Andre?
Glenn, would you like to go?
Okay. Just one thing here is that when we take a look at education, higher education in the state of California, there's more than the UC system. There's the California State University system, there's a community college system, there are all kinds of entities. In fact, the way this higher education system was put together is really a marvel. It's like a pyramid. You start at the bottom with the first 2 years, access almost free. Well, it's getting expensive now, but for a long time, it was very cheap to go there. Anyone could get into it, and you could move up, all the way up through the pyramid, through the CSU, and at the very top was UC, with PhD, with programs, with medicine, and with law. So there was points of entry all along the way for all kinds of people to get into it. So when you take a look at educational failure or educational success, you have to look at that entire system. Now, what Sean told you was, he gave you some figures for the UC system. I don't have the figures for the rest of it, but all of that has to be taken into account before you say that the affirmative action program is necessary, and before you say the 209 is fair.
Okay, thank you very much. I think this is a good time to start going into SB 185 of this bill. Just for the benefit of the audience, SB 185 would authorize the UC and CSU to consider a variety of relevant factors in the undergraduate and graduate admissions decision, so long as no preference is given, including race, gender, ethnicity, national origin, geographic origin, and household income. This is quoted from the bill, and I'd like to put this to the panelists. Do you believe that any or all of these categories are valid considerations that UC and CSU should make? Are any of them more relevant than others? And is it possible to consider these factors without inherently giving preference, as the bill states? So first, I think I'd like to turn to Ronald. Would you like to respond to this? If not, we can go to Sure. It's just about the provisions of the bill of SB 185. Do you believe that the categories listed in the bill are valid considerations that UC and CSU should make?
I think that they definitely are. Affirmative action is a policy of desegregating higher education, and where various groups, because of discrimination, are excluded, you need to not exclude them. And so I think they absolutely are valid. And I think that hopefully it will be signed by the governor, and BAM will be campaigning to make sure it's a reality on the UC campuses. We have discriminatory admissions policies at these universities, and it's possible. And the universities can do more than they've already been doing. At UCLA and at UC San Diego, protest movements within the last 3 years have led to doublings of Black Latino admissions. And at UC San Diego, people remember that the numbers went down to 55 or so. It was completely unacceptable. And I think that SB 185 should be supported and expanded. I also want to respond to a couple of things that have been said.
Okay, just keep it to a minute.
Okay, yeah, I think it's deceptive to say that underrepresented minority enrollment has recovered since Prop 209. The fact is the state has become much more diverse over the last 15 years. I believe, I don't have the stats on me, but I believe about 25% of high school graduates in 1996 were Latino. And the numbers of Latinos are comparable today than they were then when there was affirmative action. But the numbers, the percentage of high school graduates today who are Latino is about 45%. And so you can't, take two snapshots and compare them to each other. That's a deceptive use of statistics. And also it's disingenuous to say, oh, you can go to UC Riverside in San Diego when the whole reason why the people are attacking affirmative action, they're complaining about the policies at UC Berkeley and UCLA and wanting to get more of the people they were representing into those campuses. And so that was my response.
Thank you. And Salim, Marco, or Ruben, do you believe that any of these categories are more relevant than others? And is it possible to consider these factors without inherently giving in preference as the bill states.
I guess I'll make 2 points. Number one, I don't think any of those can be weighted above the other. But I did want to point out some language of the bill. Number one, it said it used the word consider. That means that it's not an obligation by the university to make sure, since making consider, it's not an obligation by the university to ensure that these are factored into that mission decision. And in addition, it says that so long as no preference is given. Is that possible? I think so, but I think it should be considered given the historical progression of events at Leslie's point, that those things such as race, gender, etc. should be considered in the admissions process. And the other point I wanted to make was that in regards to pre and post Prop 209 admission rates, according to University of California Boulevard School, that the enrollment and admission rates for Black students is the same as it was before the Civil Rights Movement after Prop 209. And so I think that's another thing that should be thought about is, do we want to return to a pre-Civil Rights Movement type era in the state of California and the United States of America?
Thank
Can I
you.
say something really quick?
I believe Marco wanted to say something first.
I just got to
Go ahead.
So,
I'll say that.
yeah, so in terms of the bill specifically, something that I'm really curious about is, do you all know that every UC is accountable for putting together a 2-week training for readers that actually read the UC applications and then they allow? So it's a 2-week course where the readers come into play, right? So I personally went to it last year because I was really curious as to what are the languages that they carry. And the first thing that they give to a reader's package when they open it is Proposition 209, right? They read Proposition 209 as a clear stature of what should be considered when they're reading the application of a UC applicant, right? So then my question then becomes, with this SB 185 in this context, right? Let's say that SB 185 passes. So when the reader opens up the booklet of them training to see what they should be considered when they read a UC application, are they going to read Proposition 209 and then SB 185? And how clear is it for the reader to know what they're supposed to be making the decisions based on in that context when they just have back-to-back bills? So it's a lot of these conversations that I think we should also put into context. The fact that if SB 185 were to pass, it doesn't go into statute immediately. It says that by 2013, there needs to be a report that's going to get presented and developed to see what are going to be the strategies that are going to be utilized to put SB 185 into effect. So I think those are the conversations that we really need to bring up. And I think hopefully we have a future panel where we invite folks from the UC-wide undergraduate admissions board and sit them down and be like, okay, how are you going to work this out? What is this going to actually look like? And for us to voice our opinions on how that should be processed and materialized and have them go back and make that decision, but then report back to us. Because I'm really curious as to what is the trainings going to be and how those policies going to be enacted per campus. Because there's no such thing as a UC-wide admissions directive. That does not exist. Every campus is available to adapt the admissions process according to what their needs and their statutes are. And have all this information, if y'all want it, there's also called the UC Accountability Report. If y'all are interested in it, there's 2 of them, one in 2009, one in 2011. And I think there's a lot of really beneficial information if y'all are interested in that topic. That's pretty much it. That's all I wanted to say. Sorry for taking a little bit longer.
Thank you, Ruben. Marco, if you have another point to make, you can take 30 seconds, otherwise we'll move over back to...
Yeah, so besides looking, as Lee was saying, besides looking at historical perspective as to the events that led up to the current day as to why we need SB 185, I also want to look into the future as to why we need SB 185. The UC recently passed something called the 2012 admissions policy, right? And whereas in this admissions policy is predicted by the UC Office of the President, this is Mark Udall's office, his statistics, that under this new policy, there will be 50% fewer African Americans on this campus. There will be 42% fewer Chicanos/Latinos on this campus, 41% fewer Filipinos, 39% fewer Pacific Islanders, and 36% fewer Asian Americans. So I wanted to point those out as well, right? And to even give a better reason why we need SB 185. Yes, as was mentioned, our state in the past 15 or so years has dramatically changed the demographics. One reason why we need SB 185 because they do not represent us today, the admissions policies today, but also looking to the future, diversity on this campus and all other campuses will fall dramatically, right? And there's something we can just replace it. That's fine.
So before we move on to the next point, I'd like to give Sean, Andre, and Glenn a chance to respond to the points that were made from the other side in regards to the categories and the provisions of SB 185. Sean?
Yeah, specifically the bill, and I want to respond to a couple of quick points. First, we had a quote invoking Lyndon Baines Johnson and his view on affirmative action. We have to recognize that was 1965, Executive Order 1124-6. 1965, but before that, we're talking about the origins of affirmative action. What is affirmative action in American society? We're talking about 1961, JFK urged colorblindness. We're talking about the origins of affirmative action by John F. Kennedy, urged for us to be colorblind. And a lot of people say that colorblindness is racism. But if you're going to say that, you're calling JFK a racist because he said we need to, quote, take affirmative action to ensure that applicants are employed and employees are treated during employment without regard to their race, creed, color, or national origin. So let's forget all this talk about constitution, legality. Let's look at JFK. Are we saying if SB 185 and the bill itself, the terms it uses about race, ethnic origin, if those terms don't directly conflict with what JFK thought affirmative action should stand for, then I don't need to go to law school to understand that. But to the bill itself, I will say that the bill, SB 185, the terms of it are so blatantly illegal, unconstitutional, but so vague. They open a wide door to litigation, lawsuit, abuse. There are estimates that this could cost the UC $250,000 to $1 million up front in legal court costs. It could be any recent graduate from Volt Law could have written this law because it is so vague and it doesn't actually. And the question is, these categories, would you put any preference over race, gender, ethnic origin? Well, a lot of previous speakers have talked about the problem with our university in terms of reflecting our population or encouraging diversity on our campuses. Well, let's talk about first diversity. We need to talk about diversity. Why are we primarily talking just about race or gender? Why aren't we looking at things such as maybe religious beliefs or political affiliation? I know that conservatives are really underrepresented here at Berkeley. Affirmative action push to recruit more conservatives on our campus for a diverse campus climate. I don't know. Now, second thing, what about reflecting our state population? California has about 48%, almost 50% white, non-Hispanic population. Berkeley has about 30% enrolled white students. Now, I would like to ask the affirmative action supporters, would affirmative action increase the enrollment of non-Hispanic whites here on campus? Because that would more accurately reflect the population of California. Some really serious problems that we're not talking about, but the bill itself is illegal. The terms are so vague, and it would be completely illogical to say it's constitutional or even in line with the original intentions of affirmative action.
Andre, the other side wants to respond. Would you like to make a point before we give the floor back to them?
Yes. I'm not qualified to participate in the statistical debate that is taking place, which, as I'll explain in a moment, I find completely irrelevant. But I would like to talk about the rhetorical shell game that's going on with SB 185. A couple of the other panelists in the bill itself say that gender, race, and whatever other factors on the list, socioeconomic status, etc., can be considered, provided that no preference is given. What exactly does that mean? What does it mean to consider a factor, but not to assign it to any particular preference? If you're considering a factor as relevant in terms of someone's qualifications to be admitted to a university, by definition, you are assigning a value to that property in terms of how it predicts the student's performance on the campus. So the idea that we can somehow include race on the list but not assign preference to it is just nonsense. Is it going to be some sort of fun fact about the candidates? Admissions officers sit around and discuss over coffee? No, they're going to assign their preference. And more importantly, these statistical conversations are meaningless. The only diversity we need on this campus is, if Sean implicitly states, is intellectual diversity. And there's almost none of it on this campus, as everybody knows. But everyone on this campus agrees that you either agree with the political precepts of the left or you are a savage bigot. And we won't go there. But I'm a student here. I don't represent anyone but myself, and I don't appreciate being lumped into random categories like person of color or underrepresented minority or anything like this. The only factors that matter when considering the admission of a student are their qualifications. And these arbitrary and nebulous racial categorizations don't do anything to help us to evaluate a student's objective qualifications to succeed here.
And we'll get Glenn's opinion before we go back to Steve.
Okay, yeah, one of the problems here with the numbers here is that what are you basing the numbers on? You're basing it on an assumption. In this case, you're basing it on an ideology. The fact is, if you take a look at college students in general, you find that different groups in society have been differentially represented in college. If we look back in history, we find that Jews from Eastern Europe were far more likely to go to professional schools, become professionals. People from Italian backgrounds didn't, and they became successes in their own right. Eventually, the Italians and the Jews and everybody else kind of came up pretty much the same level. Another thing is that my campus, Cal State Avery, long time ago, when affirmative action was still going, I was pretty good friends with the head of what they call the Chicano Studies Department. They merged it, now it's ethnic studies. And this guy was pretty upset because he says, here we are sitting in Hayward and Fremont and San Leandro area. That's where our students came from. And so many of them are Latino. And this was an old-time school superintendent that became a professor and was the head of this department. So he was in education. And he was very frustrated because so many choices, the Latinos that went for other things. They went for the blue-collar jobs, for the crafts industry, and this sort of thing, as opposed to going to be a doctor or a lawyer or just going to college to go into business. So we have this thing right away, is that the Asians, for example. Asians put a huge, like the Jews in the earlier part of this, the last century, they have a tremendous respect for education and they work very hard to go there. Now, you don't have to go to college to be a success. In fact, if we all did, we'd be like a bunch of ants. We'd all do exactly the same thing. We need diversity, and we need diversity of interests, we need diversity of skills, we need diversity of various kinds of work. And so when we sit down, as some people do, and look at these narrow figures, without looking at the background of them, without asking any questions other than, do we have parity with a statistical profile? If you do that, then you really are being deceptive.
Thank you, Glenn. And Sally or Marco, whichever one of you prefers to go first.
Right. I would like to, try to respond to everyone that just spoke, but it'll be kind of difficult. So I'm just gonna pinpoint a couple of things. First, what are the unconstitutional things that you keep on saying? This is directly for Sean, because there's many things that are constantly said. Oh, this is constitutional. My whole thing is that Hernandez, the legislator who wrote SB 185, and the rest of the overwhelming majority of the California legislators, I think they know the Constitution pretty well. And I'm just saying, I think they know the Constitution pretty well. And like, I'm just trying to say, like, what are the things, because I want to know for myself. That's the first thing. Second thing, there needs to be a holistic approach to when admitting students. It cannot just be on what was your GPA and what was your SAT scores. That's wrong at so many levels, and we cannot just have admittance based on that. For example, I did not have the highest GPA as many of you here did. And I'll say quite honestly, I had somewhere between a 3.5 and 3.7. My SAT scores were not all that good, right? They were actually pretty horrible. But I believe that the University of California did take a holistic approach, at least on myself and many other people from similar backgrounds from me, that came from a majority underrepresented community, that came from a school that was on the verge of shutting down, that came from a family that was low income, that came from a place where I had to work two jobs while in high school. So I did not have time nor the resources, right, to get that 4.0 plus GPA. Not even 4.1 because my school didn't offer AP classes. So I couldn't even compete. I couldn't really compete against students who had AP classes at their high schools. So there needs to be a holistic approach towards this, and SB 185 does it. And it does it in a more fair and equal way.
You asked a pointed question to Sean. Can I give him a 30-second chance to
Of
respond
course.
to
Yeah, no, of
constitutionality
course.
of 185? Sean?
Well, I need 30 seconds to answer the first part, and then 30 seconds to... Okay, so I want to... It's a good question. I genuinely want to answer the question in all sincerity. And first, I'll answer first by posing a question. What is, to everyone here, what is a more serious issue? Some college Republicans at the free speech capital of the world. What is the bigger issue? Some college Republicans putting on a bake sale, or a body that is charged to uphold the state and federal constitution, violating their own constitution and passing bills that directly conflict with existing law? And so I want to answer the question, no. A combination of factors, and I mean, totally outside of this panel, this discussion, but the fact that we have rapid turnover in the legislature, some incompetent legislators, and a number of conflicting laws on the books. Do you know how many amendments we have to our state constitution? Almost 600, about 580, I think. And so it's a fact that we have laws on the books that conflict, and this law would directly conflict with the Constitution. I want to add, just because it relates to your pointed question, and so my short answer is yes, I don't think the legislators understand parts of the Constitution, or are actively just disregarding it and hoping that it gets by. So that's my answer. Secondly, you talk about a more holistic approach to the application process, and I level with that. Now, I did get a 4.3 and got pretty good SATs, but the fact that I'm a white male, I'm Republican, I'm like the president of the college Republican, so I must get the highest, I must really relate to the highest white privilege that we were speaking of. But I want to point out, since you brought in your personal story a little bit, I'd just like to add that I'm certainly a first-generation college student. Nobody in my family, any side of my family, has ever gone to any college ever. I come from a single mom background that makes less than $15,000 a year. My mom has a small business cleaning homes, and let's see, like I said, I was the first college student any side of my family ever go to college. Senior year of high school, I didn't have electricity in my house, didn't have internet, so I recognize very seriously these more holistic issues. I personally recognize these issues, but SB 185 doesn't talk about any of that.
Thank you, Sean. And I'd like to go back to Sally, who wanted to speak earlier.
I want to address a couple of points. There's a lot of levity. And the points I want to address, number one, is this whole issue of underrepresentation. There's a difference between being underrepresented and suffering from innumerable microaggressions on a daily basis. There's a difference between having to walk into a classroom or walk on a campus knowing that this campus is not receptive necessarily, not to your political ideology, but to the fact that your skin tone is a different skin tone from the people who have dominated the American society for the past 100 years. That's a totally different thing. Number two, I want to point to the fact that affirmative action and SB 185 come out of a historical progression of steps. That wasn't just, oh, well, we need more people of color in colleges, period. Why weren't there people of color in the colleges in the first place? And the reason is because we live in a country that's constantly and consistently discriminated against particular people in the society. And so the question that I have for the panelists is, why do you think that the numbers of the representation for people of color and for women are finding so often to be underrepresented? Is it just because they are inadequate, they're not capable of being able to get into the University of California system by nature? Or is there something in our system that causes the educational process where they are unable or inhibited from being successful? And so there's a difference. I didn't go to high school with AP class either. And so what is the impact of that on my mission? And so I think it's important to remember some things. For example, 69% of black children cannot read in the 4th grade. Is that because they're inherently unable to read, or is that because they live in a country, in a system where the schools that they're going to are not funded properly and are not resourced properly, therefore causing their education trajectory to be inhibited, compared to 29% of white children? Only 12% of black high school seniors are proficient readers, while 54% have below basic reading skills. It's estimated 40 to 44% of blacks are functionally illiterate. Black children are 3 times more likely than white children to be labeled mentally retarded. Blacks are 2.5 times more likely to be placed in remedial or low track classes. And the whole tracking system, that's another thing that we have to address. My point is that this is not the 12th grade get into college thing. This is a system that has produced a particular result where people do not have that equal chance of getting into the university. And to make up for the systemic issue and injustice and imbalance, there has to be something to repel that imbalance. And that's where affirmative action and SB 185 fits in. It's repairing the damage that's been done, not just in the K-12 experience of one child, but has been done for 400 years to an entire group of people.
Ronald, I know you wanted to add to that before they respond.
Yes. Yeah, and I think partly there's been an answer to your question, Sally, as to why I think minorities don't perform have higher scores. Mr. Custer talked about specific ethnic groups, white ethnic groups that were historically discriminated against who rose up, and also referred to Asian Americans. He's implying that the people he's not mentioning have a work ethic. He's implying that the people he's not mentioning care about their education. And I take offense to that as an Asian American who's been labeled as a model minority in this debate. Asian Americans, by the way, benefit directly from affirmative action. Asian Americans who graduate from college make 11% less than their white counterparts. Women make 74% to every male person's dollar in similar jobs and similar positions. And I throw statistics out because that's reality. If we're denying statistics, we're saying we don't care about reality. Then we're relying on demagogy. We have to use the facts and talk in a debate. And that's my report.
Thank you. And before we move on, I just wanted to announce to the audience we're collecting cards. If you have questions, please just pass them down at the end. And one of the APSA members will be collecting them. If you need a card, she also has those. Andre, did you want to respond or
there were a couple points that Celine made that I'd like to respond to. First of all, the notion that women are discriminated against in higher education is nonsense. UC Berkeley is 54% female. The numbers on the national scene look similar. Women are not an underrepresented minority in any higher educational context. At least at the undergraduate level, I will clarify, just in case someone wants to add this. Now, Celine was talking about issues of literacy from the 4th grade and from the 10th grade. First of all, with all due respect, I don't think it's a compelling argument that a minority student who's in the 10th grade and is functionally illiterate, I don't think it's a compelling argument. I don't think that's a compelling argument that we should make it easier for him to get into college. I think we should make it easier for him to read so that he can be prepared. And I don't think anyone here is unaware of the historical disenfranchisement of various minority groups that has occurred at social, political, and economic level. There's no question that has happened. The question we're debating here is what the solution to that is. And so we continually references the tragic status of K-12 education minority communities, and rightly so. But fudging with the numbers at the point of college admissions does nothing to ameliorate any of that. And as for the gentleman from Bama, I apologize, I forgot your name. Ronald. Ronald asks us, why are minorities underrepresented? Why do I think minorities are underrepresented on this campus? Well, unless we're to assume that there's a conspiracy going on to exclude them, I can only suspect that it's because fewer minorities are qualified to be here. But no worries, there are solutions to minorities being underqualified as a group. The solution is to make them more qualified, not to lower the standards, which is, everyone knows, the term holistic admissions is, in fact, just a euphemism for lowered standards.
Do you still want to respond to that point? We're going to do one last response, and then I have another question before we take questions from the audience.
Go first, go back.
I go first, yeah.
We only have time for one of you to make a response.
Okay, first, the criteria have been shown to not correlate with success at UC Berkeley. So I think we kind of have to start there. To use qualified and unqualified, whether one intends it, that triggers prejudice on the basis of affirmative action that they're not qualified. That's not, and that they're not intellectually capable, which is not true. In 1998, 800 students were Black, Latino, Native American who were denied admission to UC Berkeley. That was the first year affirmative action was not used. 808 Black, Latino, Native American students had 4.0 GPAs or higher. Those are the students who historically have benefited from affirmative action in elite competitive admission systems like UC Berkeley. It's not the person who's illiterate, who could be of any race, by the way. That doesn't have to be a Black person, and we're triggering a lot of racial stereotypes in this room, but it's the people who are benefiting from affirmative action are qualified by the people by the admission system that the way those systems are designed. So, yeah. Okay, that was
Let's
it.
give. You had a question before. You have 30 seconds to make it though. Sally.
I just want to respond to a couple of things that the brother up there said. Number one is that when we talk about
I really want to
That's very
Can we bring the space back to an educational space as opposed to a judgmental space? Because that's what I thought I was here for. To be on the
All right, I'll reemphasize. We want to keep this respectful as possible. With that being said, let's let's continue and
I appreciate it so they respected me by referring to me by my name instead of lumping me in with people he thinks I am. But
I didn't know if you I just called you brother.
yeah, brother, person of color, these are terms I don't like. I prefer to be called by my name. I'm an individual.
What's your name?
My name is Andre.
Okay,
I represent
you
me.
said brother, exactly.
Okay.
I apologize. But to the point that I was speaking of, number one, the reason I mentioned the literacy rates, the reason I mentioned the K-12 situation, is not because I think that individuals that are illiterate should be admitted to the University of California, Berkeley, but I'm saying the fact is that many people of color go to these schools where the educational opportunity is limited, and therefore that should be taken into consideration when it gets to the collegiate level. And the reason it should be taken into consideration is that at some point you have to begin to repair the damage. And if that's the point that you can do it at, that's the point you should do it at. And the other point that I want to make is the fact of the matter is that research shows that a diverse population, racially and ethnically, contributes to a more well-rounded student. And so according to Jamila Moore, she says, and I quote, research shows that students who are educated in a diverse environment can enhance their racial understanding, cultural awareness, and appreciation of differences. But this interaction is reduced or in some cases eliminated, the quality of education is diminished.
Thank you. And on that note, talking about the student body, I have one more question that will be available for all of you before we go to our student questions, and that is, if Governor Brown were to pass SB 185 in the next few days, how do you see this affecting the student body here at Cal, and how do you see it changing the CSU systems in the next 5 years? If someone's ready to respond to this now, shall the judges take it?
Yeah.
And we'll try to keep it to 30 seconds to 1 minute so we have a chance to answer this audience questions.
Okay, 1 minute, sure. So, what do I see the immediate effect of SB 185? Unquestionably, lawsuits, court, litigation immediately for the next 18 months, no question about it. And it isn't supposed to be implemented for a couple of years anyway, but the point is, the effects of 185 is going to be lawsuit, it's going to be a lot of money for the state, it's going to be a lot of money for the UCs to spend on lawsuits against abuse and litigation. So the immediate or even the long-term effects of SB 185 in our student population will not be realized. We're just going to see a lot of costs that are going to be taken by lawsuit, and eventually case law will support the unconstitutionalness of SB 185. Now, in terms of the future going forward, campus climate, and where we're going from here, I would I invoked JFK earlier. I'd like to invoke Senator Obama when he was speaking about race in America. He said, quote, "To wish any of the resentments of white Americans to dismiss them as misguided or even racist, without recognizing that they are grounded in legitimate concerns. This too widens the racial divide and blocks path to understanding." Why am I saying that? Because a lot of what brought us here today, a lot of the conversations that happen maybe even outside this room, or conversations that will be had afterward, is going to be rooted in continuing ideas such as white privilege, white ignorance, people that just don't get it. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm coming from a perspective that is far beyond the color of my skin or my party affiliation. It's coming from my single mother background, my very low income, and my adversities I face that cannot be reflected in the color of my skin. So going forward, we need to think about those issues. And honestly, I'm just surprised that we're debating what you would, I guess, self-identify progressives that are arguing for affirmative action, yet progressives want to go backwards to a policy that has proven to be broken, a policy that has failed and has been shown to be unconstitutional. If you're progressive, why don't we work forward and start looking past color and look at the serious issues, such as underfunded school districts, such as socioeconomic issues. Let's look at those issues beyond. Let's be progressive in that way, not in backwards affirmative action.
Thank you. And we'll go to the other side of the table. Marco, would you like to answer this one?
Yeah, I think no one from this side of the aisle has said that we don't need to fix the problem that's affecting K-12, and specifically problems that are affecting students of underrepresented communities, low-income communities, and et cetera. No, I mean, I think we all stand for it that the state, that the country needs to significantly do something about that. That's a problem, and we need to fix it. But I want to also state again why it is important because you mentioned we should be fixing only that problem and not fudging with the numbers here at the university level. It is essential because to fudge with those numbers here at the university level. Because I wanted to remind everyone here who does, in terms of students of color on this campus, who does the work of the Office of Undergraduate Admission. It is the students of color on this campus. It is the different recruitment and retention centers that put in so much effort, so much of their hard work, so much time, every single day of their time here at Berkeley to recruit and to retain students from their communities. The recruitment and retention centers
here on this campus have an overly excessive amount of their yield rates and admissions rates compared to the Office of Undergraduate Admission. If it wasn't for our recruitment and retention centers being there, right, our numbers, the Latino population on this campus wouldn't be 8%, it would be somewhere at 3%. The black population on this campus wouldn't be 3%, it would be 1%. We need to significantly adjust the numbers of students of color on this campus, right? Because we are essentially the ones who recruit and retain students to this campus. It is those students who put in all the efforts and do the work that our administration should be doing. It is because of those students that many students of color that are here right now in this audience and here on this panel, right? That's the reason why they're here, because of the work students did.
Thank you, Margot. Since we have 15 minutes left, we're going to move on to audience questions. Some of them are directed, so you'll have a chance to. So you say there are other ways besides SB 185 affirmative action to end discrimination. Please describe one way. This has a few, but we have time for one.
All right, I'll go when you go. So SB 185. Okay, let's name one way
to end discrimination, not using SB 185.
Okay, well, that's a big issue. Discrimination, we're not going to end discrimination in this world anytime soon based on one law. I mean, we have to recognize that. How are we going to, I think the goal of the question is how are we going to increase diversity, equity, inclusion on our campuses for the sake of these things we value. So I'll just say one answer, and it's whatever Andre wants to say. I would talk about looking at, and actually I'm stealing from Andre, what he said earlier about looking at them, making sure, for example, they can read. Because we talked about, and I mentioned at the very beginning, in terms of success, we're talking about the dropout rates. So 26% of African American students graduated during affirmative action, whereas 52% are now graduating as of 2001 after affirmative action. So the point I'd make is, or what solution can we make without considering race? Look at socioeconomic factors, look at underfunded school districts, look at school districts in communities which may be predominantly concentrated by certain ethnicities, but don't look at the color of their skin, look at the communities they come from and look at how we're going to get books in the classroom, how we're going to get qualified teachers, and how are we going to fix their educational problems before they get to the admissions process, because that's not fixing the issue.
Thank you. Audrey, would you like to respond to that? Do you have the same opinion?
I certainly agree with what you said about K-12 education, but a different way to end discrimination. I'd like to address how we can eliminate discrimination in more substantive terms instead of simply in the terms of those who support affirmative action. A great way to eliminate discrimination in general in America, at least as far as I know, would be to stop categorizing and classifying people into categories based on these arbitrary categories like black, white, Latino, Asian, etc. But unfortunately, this campus does a lot of that. There's scarcely a racial group on this campus that doesn't have its own research wing, academic department, or student group. And there's quite a bit of double speak going on this side of the aisle, because one individual from BAM continually asserts that there's discrimination going on in the university in the admissions office here. And we have another individual who talks about the recruitment and retention centers that are working day and night to increase the minority numbers on this campus. And of course, all of those departments are part of the very same administration, so I don't know exactly what's going on there. But I would rather we think about issues like diversity and inclusion in terms that go beyond the oversimplified categories of gender.
This next question is specifically for the pro-affirmative action side. I'll let you guys decide who wants to answer it. Only one person, please. Why specifically do you support ethnicity-based affirmative action instead of class-based affirmative action? And I'll let the three of you decide who wants to answer. Okay, try to keep it to less than a minute, thank you.
We support both. I think that actually the argumentation against race-conscious affirmative action cuts also against socioeconomic affirmative action, because they're assuming that SAT, GPA, so forth are neutral criteria. Individuals such as Sean Lewis, who come from poor families who have disadvantages as a result of that specific kind of disadvantage, would benefit from socioeconomic affirmative action. And so they're not counterposed. But racism still exists. Racism is experienced by people of all social classes, just as sexism is experienced by people who are rich and poor. And so you still need social policies to correct that.
Thank you. Trying to find some more questions for the conservative side. This question says Chris Matthews on MSNBC would not respond to this question, and it gives a quoted question. Should any student, your son or daughter, be denied admission to a college or university on the basis of race? And I'll just ask, does anyone want to respond to this? Should any student be denied admission to a college or university on the basis of race?
No.
Okay. Elaborate if you'd like.
I would say no, and I think though that it's a false thing that for a white person who gets rejected from a college, or let's say an Asian American who's against affirmative action, to blame affirmative action for their not getting opportunities. I would say that the attack on affirmative action has opened the way for what we're seeing politically going on against public education. The winning of affirmative action established financial aid programs, federal financial aid, Title VI, I believe, in the early 1970s, in order to make it possible for the racial minorities who are entering higher education for the first time to be able to afford college. Those programs have benefited poor people of all races. And the fact that we're now seeing an attack on public higher education that's leading to a lowering of the numbers of California state residents, so that there's now 28% fewer California state residents coming to UC Berkeley, being admitted to UC Berkeley than 3 years ago. That's a disadvantage. That's harming people of all races who are California state residents. And I would argue we need to unite together and defend public education, but that means not kowtowing to the divide and conquer politics of the people against affirmative action.
Thank you, and we'll go to Sean
Real quick, and so the question is, should a person be denied based on their race? And so my answer is no, they should not be, but I would turn the question around and say, should any person be admitted based on their race? And the reason I pose it in that way is, should any person feel like their admission to any university is lessened, or the value of their admission is all diminished by the consideration of their race? Chief Justice Clarence Thomas, when he found out that his admission to Yale, the Yale Law School, was based on race and affirmative action, he went and put his degree up in his attic because he was ashamed of it. I don't think anybody should be ashamed of their achievements. I think people should be proud of that. And the BAM representative said that I would benefit from a socioeconomic affirmative action structure. Even though that wasn't in place, I still got to the #1 public university in the country. The point, though, is would I want to benefit? Would I, as a white male, or any person as an ethnic minority, want to go to their job application and say, yes, I got my degree from Berkeley, and they're like, oh, well, that's an affirmative action school. Okay, it's a little less important. I would pose the question the other way. I don't think people want that kind of label on their degree.
Do you want financial aid?
I get financial aid, merit, and scholarship. Yeah.
We're going to move on to the next question. We're going to move on to the next question. We have time for a closing statement. Sorry. This one is for our pedestrian. How has Prop 209 been a success, and what progress did it stop?
Well, first of all, when Prop 209 was first presented to the public, this racial regime is what I call it. This notion that we have to divide up everybody on the basis of these rigid racial stereotypes. This was moving forward just about everywhere. Suddenly, the whole world was talking about it. And when I say the whole world, I mean that. I saw my picture in the New Delhi Times. I was on German television. I was in BBC. I mean, they came to find out about this because the whole world was interested to see what was going on in this respect. So this brought the issue forward. Then people had to stop and think, what kind of a country do we want? Do we want a balkanized country? Do we want a country where you have ethnic entrepreneurs constantly drive a wedge between people? Or do you want a country where you try to focus on the individual, that individual's merit, that individual's qualifications? And if you find out that that you have disparities, then you ask the question, why is that the case? And then you go and you fix that problem. You don't just simply come up and say at the last minute, well, I'm just going to jump and fix it. Now, the Prop 209 was a success in the sense that everybody started thinking about it, and it stopped this progression, stopped the growth of this balkanization. It's still around, but it's not going as fast as it was before. And I think that possibly, if this goes to the Supreme Court, case law is on our side, on the side of us on this side of the table, and so is everything else we have. We have this Sixth Circuit Court. There was only a panel that looked at the Proposition 2 in Michigan. That's going to en banc. What that means is going to the whole court. I don't know what they're going to do. Eventually, it might even get to the Supreme Court, and then we'll have a decision there. But it's not decided yet. And I think, though, that we're in the best path possible to try to stop people who want to balkanize us, who want to drive a wedge constantly.
We have time for 30 seconds. So.
Okay, I just want to say a couple points. Number one, in terms of someone be denied on the basis of race, I would say no. But I would also say that I'm denied access to equal education, K through 12, and at the collegiate level on the basis of my race, and all the time. And black students, and Latino students, and underrepresented students all the time. And so I want to make a quick point about merit. I want to say that merit was founded and discovered for the sole point of excluding Jews outside of some of the primary universities in the East Coast. There's Harvard. And number three, I want to say on the point of denial is not only am I denied, but I don't think anyone the proposition or SB 185, not say someone will get a check mark and that will get them into the school. It's just, it can be considered, but not given preference. And so I just want to clarify the language because we said I'm straw man arguments.
Well, on that question, we have someone from the audience that wants to know if you're considering race, but really giving absolutely no preference, then how will SB 185 help the underrepresented groups? What's the point of looking at these factors if you can't do anything about them? Let's keep this on. This isn't directed, but I'm assuming this is for either Marco, who has spoken a little bit. Would you like to take this one? Or Sally?
I mean, sure. I think it's when those 2 weeks pass that an admissions officer has to go through. They're gonna have to see not just what happened in the past, 2009, what's happening today. And what are the steps from then to now? And what are the things that have come out from it? How does our state look today? How does our University of California look today? It is important to, in this case, consider race, consider gender, consider socioeconomic background, and all other aspects that are similar to that are in the bill. Because it pinpoints exactly what our country is going through right now. And it pinpoints what it has been going through for the past 300 years, really. That there are social, economic, racial, and ethnical inequities in our society that are affecting all of us today. I mean, I don't know what a better way to answer that question is, but that it's going to consider, we have to consider race into it. We have to consider, if that's what the question is saying, then as an admissions officer, you must consider race.
Ron, do you want to add to that real quick?
Yeah, I think it's completely going to be determined through political struggle what a preference is. I think that it's a lot of what happens in the law, you don't find absolute truth in a word. And that language is put in there in order to make it compatible with 209, but to express the will of the legislature, to university administrations to do as much as you can to correct the crying problem of lack of representation of Black, Latino, Native American students. So I would say that, and I think that if it were passed, we would have to make sure that it's used to the fullest extent possible. Now, the word preference, just to say, when you use the SAT as a criterion for admissions, you are preferring white students. That's a preference for white students. Asian Americans score an average 1,605 in California. Whites, actually, I want to fact sheet, this is the national figures, but in California, whites score systematically higher on on the SAT than any other group on that test. And remember, at the same time, it does not correlate with anything more than how well you do in college in the first year. And so what affirmative action does is correct and capture the discrimination and preference that's already existing in admissions.
Thank you. And that's the end of time we have for questions from the audience. But since you guys were given the last question, I'm going to give this side 30 seconds to respond if they'd like. Otherwise, we'll move on to closing.
Yeah, less than 30 seconds. Okay, so I like to really focus on the question itself. So we're talking about the word preference. If no preference can be given, we're debating Where is the gray line or between the word preference? It reminds me of the debate we had, or Bill Clinton, in terms of the word is. If we're debating the word what does is really mean? That was what Bill Clinton had to explain. Wasn't it is, right? Or was it the? I think it was is. If we're having to define a word, well, what does is really mean? Okay, can we say it in this way? I think that's what we're looking at. This reminds me of that. Preference. If no preference can be given, and I'll say that, how can any bill that says no preference can be given, how can we use these factors? The answer is you can't. Let's just say that this bill was in its own planet, its own country, and its own universe, even without our Constitution, even without our case law, which totally shuts this bill down. If you had none of that, the bill conflicts itself. The bill negates itself. It says that we'll use these factors, but no preference, then what's the point of the factors?
Okay, thank you very much. On that, we'll start doing our closing statements. Please respect the 1 minute time limit. Jocelyn will show you a 30-second warning, 5-second warning. And since we started opening statements on this side, we'll start closing statements on this side with Marco. Again, Jocelyn's right here with the time. Go ahead, thank you. Marco,
Okay, sorry, yeah. So as a closing statement, first and foremost, I think the most important thing that we can take from today is that we must continue to develop these critical spaces, such as this one, to continue these conversations and our further understanding of these critical issues affecting our society today, and our UC, our campus as well. We must continue to have these discussions, and I would love to have something not like this and like we're viewing y'all and y'all are viewing us, but something more of a more round table discussion sort of thing. Maybe that UPSA can put together, or UPSA. And you know, I feel that it's important because these discussions have not been happening as well as they need to from all parties, from all sides of the aisle, to talk about public education, to talk about these racial inequities in our system. So first, I mean, I think we're like was mentioned at the beginning, we're not going to find in today's conversation a solution. You know, we're going to agree to disagree, but we can continue these conversations, and I would love that.
Thank you. Sully?
First of all, thank you all again for putting on this conversation. A couple points that I want to make in regards to affirmative action. Although it was passed in the early 60s, it was not implemented until 1978. By the time it was cut off, it only allowed for 18 years to that actually be in action. And so this 18 years, less than one generation, make up for the historical process of inequality. That's point number one. Point number two is that it is proven that students that engage in a diverse educational system or a diverse educational experience are more likely and better equipped to engage in a diverse world. So because once we leave from Berkeley, that we're going into a world that's a lot more than monolithic. The world is very, very diverse, and we have to be able to interact and engage in those spaces. Number three is that I think that the state of California really has to reevaluate the California Master Plan, go back to it, and in addition to that, the state needs to begin to put more effort into its logical, its statistical, and practical means of bettering education. For example, there is no figure for how much it costs to educate a person in the state of California, but there are figures for how much it costs to incarcerate. The last point that I want to make is that we're glad that we need more critical spaces where we can discuss issues such as these, because far too often they're not discussed. And because they're not discussed, we continue to move on inequitably.
That's time. Thank you. Ronald?
Yeah. First, just after the event, there's a band table with fact sheets on the SAT and other stuff. I encourage people to take food from it. Yeah, I think that we're seeing today a historic attack on the principle of public education. And this is completely tied with the ground that has been set with the attack on affirmative action and the attack on the principle that education should serve social goals and should be democratic and should serve the public that's funded. And just when it ended with King, he said, from where do we go from here in 1967? Integration is mutual sharing of power. White Americans must recognize that justice for Black people cannot be achieved without radical changes in the structure of our society. The comfortable, entrenched, the privileged cannot continue to tremble at the prospect of change of the status quo. This is a multiracial nation where all groups are dependent on each other. There is no separate white path to power and fulfillment, short of social disaster, that
does not share power with Black aspirations for freedom and human dignity.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Integration means merger. It means people coming together for some common cause. What we've heard tonight, and what we hear over and over again, is that this is not the way this country should be organized. This country should be organized along the lines of involvement, where everybody is race conscious. Every good and benefit is awarded on the basis of race, without any question about why that might be, why there might be some inequities. It also involves the assumption that the state is all powerful, that the state can look at some problem out here and mandate some kind of result. And if that result isn't achieved, then they apply more coercion and pressure. This is not the way to run a society. It's been tried before, and we know it's failed. So when we look at people who are saying, we need affirmative action, what they're saying is we need people like us to be in charge. We want to be the arbiters. We want to be the ethnic entrepreneurs. We want to completely disregard what's out there, the dynamics of the world, and try to, and not even think about ameliorating the situation. It's just simply following that one course of power, all located in the state. I thank you for inviting me here. This is really a student forum, and I shouldn't have said anything at all. But they asked me to come because I was the co-author of the initiative. And I'm delighted to see you talk. I'm glad to see everybody here talking about these things. That's what a university is supposed to be about. It's supposed to be where people with different attitudes and different feelings and different approaches get together and talk. They're not going to always agree. They're not going to agree all the time. I think this has been a very, very well handled session, and I congratulate you all.
Thank you very much. Andre?
Rather than use this time to rehearse what's already been said, I'd just like to make a few comments about the campus climate. It's important that we acknowledge what inequalities and what observations we make are actually the result of discrimination, which we're assigning to discrimination arbitrarily. This campus is not hostile to minorities. I'm a minority on this campus. Incidentally, I got a 2340 on the SAT. I come from a working class Asian family. I don't know what why exactly that should cause me to perform lesser on that particular exam. But the idea that students of color are made to feel uncomfortable on this campus, I have to emphasize as a student of color, is nonsense. We had 20 people selling cupcakes. We had 400 people laying down in the middle of Sprout Plaza claiming to be oppressed by 20 people selling cupcakes. We had a chancellor who sent out a campus-wide email condemning BCR and their event for political reasons, although they claimed they were substantive. And this isn't necessarily a round conclusion. I don't have any witty remarks for the last thing, but I do have to say, I don't know where you get the idea that merit is a concept that was made up to oppress Jews. I'm really fascinated by this claim, and I'd love to hear your evidence for that.
Okay, and I too would not I don't want to go back and rehash all the points that have been made, and I would actually like to just refocus or kind of leave you guys thinking about the bill itself, SB 185, which will be decided on in just a short few days. So I hope that everybody does continue to think about this. And I am open to further dialogue after that bill is decided on and as we move forward with this issue. It's not going away anytime soon. But I'd like to just make a few points about the bill itself, about what people are saying about it, and yeah, basically. LA Times, you know the LA Times. I don't know if you read this editorial piece by the LA Times, not an op-ed. The editorial board of the Los Angeles Times came together, wrote their opinion about SB 185, and you should go look it up. The title is, "We're sorry Californians voted for Prop 209, but the legislature's attempt to undo it is wrong." And in the article, they say very clearly that they support affirmative action, that they want affirmative action in our universities, but it is completely illegal and unconstitutional for 185 to be signed by the governor. They say they continue to support affirmative action, but using race, sex, color, ethnicity, national origin, public education is directly contradictory to our state constitution. And they urge that if Californians are unhappy with this decision, with Prop 209, they should go back to the voters, not look for the legislature in 185 to remedy that. And one other point I'd like to leave, just for the emphasis that we are in this Berkeley bubble where we have some certain very loud groups or very small groups. I mean, my group might be small on this campus, but I'd like to expand this out to California. Look at a poll that was taken the day before our bake sale. The day before our bake sale, a poll was taken across the state of California and asked about every single part of the bill. And the main part of the bill, the question is, when colleges are determining which students to admit and the students which to reject, should they be allowed or not allowed to consider a student's race? And overwhelmingly, across every demographic, there was a resounding no. The overall percent, 77% of respondents said no, and I just want to point out that across every age group, every ethnicity and race, 78% of whites said no, 82% of African Americans said no, 68% Hispanics said no, 85% Asians said no. In fact, interestingly enough, 73% of Republicans said no, 78% of Democrats said no. So, for popular opinion, in terms of usurping the voters' will in Prop 209, when this goes to court, the state of California is opposed to 185 strongly.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you to all our panelists. I hope you guys enjoyed the President Johnson for closing remarks and
Hey guys, sorry, one moment. I know that we've had a long time today. First of all, I want to thank you all for coming again, and thank you all our panelists. They're all very busy people, and they take time out of the day to come speak to us. Secondly, I want to apologize that not all questions were answered. There was an overwhelming amount of questions, and we could only choose a few. If our panelists are available afterwards, I encourage you guys to continue the conversation. Thirdly, one thing that you guys might be interested in, on October 8th, UPSA will be hosting a great debate with PCR and CalDems. CalDems will be in attendance. 18. I'm sorry, did I say 8?
Yes.
I meant 18. Sorry. National Debt. Alan Ross will be moderating, so if any of you have him as a professor, yeah. Anyway, yes, so thank you so much. Hope you